Tell me how you learn. That's the motto of our video series, in which people share their personal experiences, tips and insights on learning. Our guest today?
I am Juan Ignacio Vidarte. I am director of the Guggenheim Bilbao Museum.
So on a personal basis, how would you describe the way you are learning?
Difficult question, because I think learning is such a natural, learning is living. So I'm not sure if I can respond. I'm not sure if I know exactly what part of my life is not learning. I would say I learn as I live.
You being the manager or the director here of the museum, how do you organize learning in the museum?
There are different layers to this, I guess. I think there is a more formalized layer where you try, or we all try, to learn as we work, learn as we move. So it's this kind of inner system or methodology that we try to comply with. I'm not sure if we always do, but we try to comply, which is learning by doing. So you do, then you try to achieve a result, you see what you have achieved, you see what you haven't achieved, you try to perfect that, and you try to keep improving as a wheel in a way. And that's an internal process that we all try to comply with in the organization. Apart from that, I think we all need to have an internal code, let's say, where we are open to learning, which requires a certain level of humility or of understanding of your own weaknesses and of your own failures. And that's not just in your professional life or as an institution, but also in your personal life. So you need to understand that by definition, what you do is not perfect. What you do is imperfect. So you need to be open to understand how you can improve what you do. Because what you do is imperfect, but also because everything is in flow, everything is changing. So even if you try to do something in the right way based on what you thought the parameters were when you begin, by the time you end doing what you're doing, the parameters will probably have changed. There is this poem I always quote. I think it's a very nice poem of this Uruguayan poet Benedetti, who says, "When we thought we knew all the answers, they changed all the questions." And I think that's life. You respond to what you think is what you need to do, but then by the time you do it, even if first of all, you don't do it perfectly, but even if you do, things have changed. So suddenly you find, well, I was responding to yesterday's questions, but that's not tomorrow's questions. And sometimes the change is very profound. It's not just slight, sometimes it's very profound. So it needs an attitude. So what I was trying to say, to summarize, is I think you have a formal process of learning where you try to convey to your organization, which is to adhere to these rules, where you plan, you try to reach a goal, you assess how much or how little you have achieved of those goals, and then you try to learn to understand what you did wrong so you can improve and learn. That's part of it. But then it needs an inner attitude, which is this attitude of understanding that you're imperfect and everything is changing. So learning, it's essential. So that's what I was saying earlier, that learn or live, I don't see there's a lot of difference.
I think it does make a lot of difference if you talk about yourself or if you talk about an organization which you run. Mm-hmm. So what kind of procedures or what kind of tools do you use, to to encourage what you are saying. I mean, an institution like the Guggenheim is basically, it's on the edges, right? Where everything you do is from the building to everything, it's on the edges. So meaning that the questions even change faster than when you are in the center.
Yes.
How do you get people ready for this?
Well, you try to get ready people for this by trying to instill this culture that change is the norm. Change is not the uncommon, change is the norm. And if change is the norm, learning is the essence, because you are never there. You need to be open. And to do that, formally we try to work with this system of like PDCA, like you plan, you assess what you have reached, you understand what you did wrong, and you make changes for the next iteration of the wheel. So this is the way I think this is the way you move forward and you adapt to change. But that's the formal part. In order for that to work, we as individuals need to have that conviction of the permanence of change. The one unchanging factor is change. I mean, that's what that's what we need to, and we try to instill that culture. In an organization like this, it's interesting because we are living in a very contemporary institution. We live in the world of art, which is by nature very open and very engaged with change. But sometimes contemporary institutions, museums, are very conservative. In our inner working, we tend to be very conservative. We tend to be very rigid to certain notions and certainly to change. We think we are there, and that's because I think we have a certain amount of... we think we know best. Because of that, we are normally more rigid than other institutions. So we need to be conscious of that so that we can work to break that internally.
So now you're also responsible for Abu Dhabi.
I am the project director from the Guggenheim.
So what kind of learnings can you take from the project here to Abu Dhabi? What kind of mistakes can you avoid?
Many. This was a unique project. There were very little references, so we didn't really have any textbook to guide us. There is no textbook now, but at least we know that things that went well here and things that could have been improved. But also, 30 years ago, the questions were not the questions that are now. So one thing that you learn is that you need to not get fixated by something that worked, like here. You don't need to replicate. You need to use the things that are still valid. You have to be open to understand that even if the project in Abu Dhabi may have maybe rooted certain aspects of this project, it's in an entirely different situation, not just geographically and culturally, but also in terms of time. It's 30 years later. It means that there are many issues that are much more relevant now than what were in 30 years ago.
For example?
For example, the mere notion of what an international or what a global or universal museum means. I mean, what does it mean to be a museum that bears the Guggenheim name in Bilbao 30 years ago or in Abu Dhabi 30 years later? I think one of the aspects that Abu Dhabi is incorporating into the museum is this notion of the transnational or transcultural museum. The idea is that the museum will be able to speak from Abu Dhabi to the world, incorporating into the narrative the idea that the canon predicated is not the traditional Western or American North European canon, which is what was behind this museum. In Abu Dhabi, the canon has exploded. So the idea is that, for example, in Abu Dhabi, you will be able to see that when you're talking about modernity or modernism or even contemporary, that doesn't mean that you only have to speak about what's happening at that time in France or in America, but what was happening in Egypt or in India or in Morocco. Hopefully, you can integrate that dialogue, which is a much richer and much more varied dialogue than what we had in mind when we were developing this museum here 30 years ago.
So what kind of role, I mean, this is also new when we talk about the 30-year time gap. What role does the digital play, the internet, in this concept?
Well, that's a new question. Digital, it's another layer. It's a new word. For museums, it's a very interesting moment because museums are predicated on the notion of the physical, of the real, not of the virtual, because that's, I think, what our main value to the visitor is that you can come and experience contact with a work of art. So digital, in a way, it's a sort of the antagonist of this, but it's not really. You can try to make it work for you. How? And that's the big question. Well, I think the how is by becoming a hybrid institution. Each museum, of course, will have a different model of hybrid. I mean, hybrid, you can be very physical and very little digital, or very digital and very little physical, depending on what your goal, what your audience, what your collection. But the digital, of course, adds new layers of richness to the experience if done right. For us, it's a very important tool because it serves us in many levels. One, it helps us connect with our audience because we are a museum in a periphery. We're a museum in a small city. We're not a capital of any big country, but our audience comes from all over the world. So how do you speak to all over the world from Bilbao? Well, digital allows us to do that because we can speak with the same effort to someone living in Bilbao or someone living in Delhi. Then the digital helps us to enrich the experience of the visitor, if done right, because we're never going to replace the physical experience. We don't want to replace the physical experience that a visitor has in contact with a work of art, but the digital can help us bridge that gap between the work of art and the visitor. Because we are, and coming back to learning, we see our role as being the connector between culture and, in our case, visual culture and the visitor. So how you make that visit enjoyable, well, you need to give them the tools to connect with the work of art. And the digital technology can help you do that. And it can even help us in helping artists produce art. This is for us the first experience a few weeks ago, but we have, thanks to Jenny Holzer, whom we commissioned work, we have added the first digital work of art to our collection. It's a work of art done in augmented reality, accessible via an app, which you can only see and enjoy through that mean. It's not physical, it doesn't exist. So from the point of view of the visitor, from the point of view of the education, from the point of view of the content, it's a great tool. But it has always, for us, it needs to be complementary. It's not an alternative.
Now, you looking back of such a long experience here at the Guggenheim, what would you say were some key moments where you said, wow, I learned something?
One certainly was when we opened the building. I mean, it was not a long process, but it were 3-4 years of planning, discussion, construction. So there was a lot of discussion about what would work, what wouldn't work. But the first time I really not understood, but got the message for what this was about was when the day we opened the museum, and there was a small queue. And I saw those visitors like 9 a.m. there, and I thought, well, this is what it's all about. I mean, it's you keep thinking about this in terms of beautiful building, great works of art, what will work in terms of installation, what type of exhibition. And I kind of forgotten what was the real purpose of all of that, which was that visitor who was queuing because they wanted to be there. It was something which they thought it was meaningful for them. To me, that was a moment where I learned that. I learned that is the real goal. That's what we need to be. I mean, we can discuss about anything, but really we have to have the focus of the visitor. That's what we need to have always had the highest priority. And then another moment, I think it was another one of these moments where you see things in a different way and you learn. When we commissioned the museum, we commissioned Richard Serra to use the space of the museum to produce this work, The Matter of Time. And when I saw them, I had seen models and I had seen them arriving by plates and they were being installed. But when I saw them at the space, and I looked at that space which I had already been living through and experiencing with different installations, so I knew the space. I thought I knew it. But when I saw that work in that space, it was something new for me. It was like you think you know something because you have seen it, but then you see it with this matter of time, with this 8 big sculptures in that space with a dialogue with the space, and you understand the space in a different way. And I realized that sometimes you think you know something, but you don't really know that. There are different layers that you have to be open to. And you have to be humble. You have to understand that, I didn't know that, and now I know it, or I understand it because of this.
Thank you very much.
It's been a pleasure.
Yeah. So this is it. The latest episode of Tell Me How You Learn. We hope you liked it and thanks for listening. I wish you a wonderful time wherever you are. Stay safe and tune in again to Tell Me How You Learn, the podcast brought to you by Time for You.